For Richard Nunns, tētahi o nā tohunga whakatangi taonga puoro. Ko te whakaora I tēnei taonga tawhito o tātou te Maori, tētahi o nā ara e whai nei e ia.
I remember in the late 50s there was a weekly magazine that was very popular at the time called the Auckland Weekly News, a very lurid reddy purple pinky cover, very, very rough newsprint and a photographic insert. And I remember the photographic insert and the facing page, an article on musical instruments. And the essence of the article was that these are in the Auckland Museum. They are objects of great beauty. We think, the museum people think they are musical instruments, but we're not absolutely sure. And we are definitely sure that nobody can play these. The sound has been lost and forgotten. Nobody knows anything about them. And I still have that cutting from 57, 58, which is my kind of start on the journey. I was attracted to the pictures of and the story of, and it certainly couldn't have been the sound. Maybe it was an obtuseness for wanting difference or wanting... there was something attracted me, and certainly my connection to Maori community was non-existent at that stage and continued to be non-existent for a very long time. It wasn't until I went back to the Waikato to teach.
I reira ka tūtaki a Richard ia Hirini Melbourne a ka kitea tō rāua kai nā kautahi ki nā mahi taonga puoro.
Hirini tells his story as being in the museum itself at Auckland, pressing his nose against the glass of the 2 or 3 putorina and thinking to himself, if I put my lips to your lips, what would the sound be? And Brian Flintoff, the kind of third member of the working trio that has been together for so long, I think his journey was making functional objects of carving and wanting things that had function as well as beauty. And so it was this, in a sense, kind of quite miraculous coalition of 3 people with a passion, or our wives, I think, would say obsessions, that began the journey, but each bringing very separate skills that 2 people couldn't have carried on the journey. One definitely couldn't. They just happened to be a magic coalition of separate skills that, well, overlapping, yes, but separate skills that made it a very powerful unit that has been able to achieve the work we have.
Ka tīmata a hiri ni rātou ko Richard ko Brian ki te ranga hau me te whakaora I nā kōrero mō nā taonga puoro I ngaro.
You start with the literature itself, and you start with the objects in the museums. So we measured them and we looked at them, and Brian started making replicas, and I doubt that I have to tell your viewers that they may look simple, but they have proved to be acoustically quite complex and sophisticated to actually make work. Music at that time, in a Western sense, had veered away from the spiritual largely, although hymn singing became very important through the 19th century here, but had veered away from the spiritual and became a pastime, a recreation, something you do when you have nothing more important to do. And very much that was how it was viewed. And of course, our work has shown that the use of these instruments as part of the toolkit of the tohunga seemed to have been exclusively used as a cell phone to the divine, as a metaphor I use often. They were in fact the flux, or the oral flux that was set up between ira tangata, ira atua, between the temporal and the spiritual, and their use as for entertainment and for recreation. They were intimate and private and hidden in the ascetic, esoteric usages. It may well have been the rank and file of traditional community may not have known very much about them at all, and held them in awe and respect because they were largely in the tapu domain very profoundly as items of use of the tohunga. You have that literature, you then use that to ask other questions, so of course our journey started in a variety of ways to flow out and amongst the people to find out what they knew. As we started to make 1 or 2 instruments and start to make sounds, people got to hear and they would say, would you visit us, would you come and show us those? And little by little this snowball of recovery began to happen, and Several things, of course, came from that. One was that we found that there was, contrary to some, in fact, at that time, recent scholarly papers, there was memory of the usages, albeit in a fragmentary way, held almost exclusively by kuia. And the process was, and we didn't devise this in any way, we stumbled on it by accident, was in our bringing out to marae and laying out the few instruments we had and talking what little we knew and making what sounds we could from them, triggered. The sound seemed to be the trigger, not the question, not the interview, but the sound, the voice of these ancestral instruments seemed to be the trigger. And after sessions in marae, kuia would come weeping and crying and holding you and stroking you and saying, "I remember." We were in a position of travelling widely, so one fragment might sit there for a long time, then suddenly click to another fragment, and to another fragment, to another fragment, and this body of knowledge started to piece itself together. Plus, you could also start to make reasonable implications about the body of knowledge that you had. And of course it's still a struggle, and it's still, we can't actually say that this is how these were played, these are the accurate and authentic voices of these, but we believe we are working in an ever-narrowing vector of probability, given the extent of our travels, of the 300 or 400 informants, most of whom sadly have passed on, given our travels into the Pacific and the kind of mix and match and work we've done there. But basically we have no living thread or link to the past. But what we do have is a template, a map, a roadmap in the Motiatia tradition of the musical forms and shapes which we think these were created to replicate or copy. So we do have that, and so I see that as a saving grace in terms of form and shape and nuances of sound, which these of course are so beautifully capable of.